Good evening, everyone. Welcome to AVPN's first South Asia Impact Capital Festival. I'm Isha, Platform Officer at AVPN, your MC for the session, and I'm very delighted to have you today. The Grandstand is a platform for us to showcase the most impactful ideas on the ground, straight from the source. Be captivated by the stories of project leaders who will take you on a journey into the beating heart of practical social impact. Each presenter will be given about 7 minutes, and now we hope to get started on the grandstand. First up, we have our first speaker for today, Kamila Patheria, Program Manager from Sambodhi Research and Communications Private Limited, talking about harnessing panel data for SDG impact. Kamila, over to you, please. Kamila, I think you are on mute.
Oh, right. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm here presenting Sambodhi's new data initiative, Sambodhi Panels. Our organization has over a decade of experience conducting monitoring and evaluation studies, and Sambodhi Panels is built as a result of the gaps we've observed in data within the development and impact sector at large. Next slide, please. So, data sources on key development indicators or the data that the sector uses to make decisions face several drawbacks. It's limited, there are only a handful of large scale surveys. And while these are fantastic and reliable sources of data, the time intervals within which they're collected is very long. And they're expensive and resource intensive exercises as well. And these surveys are largely reflective only of the supply side, which is very limiting. So, what the sector really needs today is an integrated data solution that overcomes these gaps and delivers data which is quick and reliable and can support dynamic decision making efforts in the sector. Moreover, the sector needs data directly from the demand side or from the household level for it to truly represent and reflect user demands and behavior. Next slide, please. This is where Sambodhi Panel steps in. Sambodhi Panels is an end-to-end product for rapid survey data collection and analysis. Our data collection architecture fuses the rapid data collection potential that Panels offers with advanced data science and analytics. We are currently building a panel of 30,000 plus households, which has representation across states, across geographies, and other socioeconomic variables, which can be sliced based on users' data needs. Using this panel architecture, users can customize and deploy fast surveys through telephonic, mobile, and other smartphone based mediums, which enable rapid and cost effective data collection. And finally, based on these surveys, users can receive data insights that can support quick decision making at the organizational level. So, just to kind of fuse everything together and give you a quick example, if I wanted to understand usage of menstrual hygiene products in District X in the state of UP, I would be able to select a panel slice representing women in District X of UP across different age groups, income groups, education levels, or other relevant socioeconomic variables. I'd be able to launch a survey through telephone, mobile, or any other platform which is most suited to the demographic in question. And I'd be able to get rapid data insights based on these surveys. Next slide, please. So, Sambodhi Panels is sector agnostic. We work across sectors and focus areas. This here is just a map of the focus areas and the kind of indicators we're capable of tracking. The list here is not exhaustive, it's just for you to get an idea. Next slide. Here we have a couple of prototype visuals of the dashboard we're building. This is where users would be able to create and launch surveys as well as view insights through interactive visuals. Next slide, please. Because I don't have much time, I just skip to the slide after because I'd like to walk everyone through a use case of Sambodhi panels with particular emphasis on education because we are discussing education today. Next slide, please. So, tuitions are an increasingly important component of learning today. However, very little data exists on the investment and the time that households incur on tuitions. And There's very little data on, say, the hours that students are spending on tuitions as well as the amount of money that households are spending on these tuitions, and not just tuitions generally, but also across subjects, like across different subjects, how much are people spending time and resources. So this is where panels can come in. Panels can help collect data from households at periodic intervals on the time and investment being spent on tuitions. And this generally can help in two things. One, we would be able to draw correlations between tuition usage behavior and the socioeconomic profile of the households. And because panels by definition collect data periodically over sustained periods, we would be able to create a reserve of data which can also be used for predictive insights in the future. So that ends my presentation here. I've tried to introduce and walk you through the concept as quickly as possible. But I'd be happy to speak in detail about Sambodhi panels individually as well later. I'd drop my email in and I'd be happy to take you through the concept in greater detail. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kamila. That was very much well in time. I invite our next speaker, Sucheta Bhatt, CEO of Dream a Dream, who will speak about dismantling barriers in the educational ecosystem to go from adversity to thriving. Sucheta, over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Isha, and thank you, Kamila, for that succinct presentation. So, like Isha said, I'm the CEO of Dream a Dream. Dream a Dream is a 20-year-old organization. And to start with, what is the specific issue we are addressing? If I can, the next slide, Isha. There are 130 million children today in India who live in poverty, and they face a myriad of different challenges. But there's a specific challenge that we look at, which is how is the education system leaving children unprepared for life? And we believe that this is happening because of two reasons. One is when children have early experiences of adversity, which includes abuse, neglect, violence, rejection. This has an impact on the development of children. So when children are growing up in spaces of adversity, they're not achieving the developmental milestones like a child in a more stable household. Second, the future has today become so unpredictable. In fact, the present is, and we know the complexity that children are entering is way beyond anything that we have known in human history before. So are we really preparing children? Do they have the skills to respond to this complexity, to respond to the unpredictability of the future? And are we preparing them for that? So what we look at Dream a Dream in the next slide is we work specifically, in the next slide, Isha, with children who come from vulnerable backgrounds, and we help them leapfrog out of adversity and prepare them for the fast changing world by helping them thrive. And to be able to thrive, what they need are life skills. Life skills, defined by WHO, are skills which help you deal with the challenges of life. They could be the ability to take decisions, to make healthy choices, to manage stress, to manage your emotions, to take initiative, to understand and follow instructions. So all of these skills that help children respond to life, respond to challenges are life skills. And we look at how we can specifically build these life skills in children who come from vulnerable backgrounds. How we do that in the next slide. We run innovation labs in Bangalore. So we have a combination of depth and scale models. In our innovation labs in Bangalore, we do a deep intervention over 7 years for children between the ages of 8 to 23. Where we use different experiential mediums, because to develop life skills, children need access to experiences and a way to exercise these life skills in a real world environment. So then we use sports, we use creative arts, we use spoken English, but all these are mediums through which we help children have those experiences that can help them build these skills, whether it's the skills of collaboration, teamwork, self-reflection, resilience. All of these skills are built through these programs. In the last 10 years, we've also been working with teachers. So we realized that the most important component for children to develop life skills was the presence of a facilitator. So we look at how teachers can build these skills, and we train teachers to integrate life skills into their classroom settings. And we also worked in the last 3 years with state departments. We are working now with 5 different state departments to integrate life skills, also called social emotional learning, into school calendars, into the school curriculum. One of the most successful programs we ran was the happiness curriculum in Delhi, where today across from nursery to grade 8, every child starts with a 40-minute happiness class, where we are focusing on their well-being, we are focusing on their emotional resilience and overall on their happiness. Similarly, we have different models across different states, today impacting almost 3 million children. Next slide. But as Dream a Dream, where we are and what I would like to share is we are now entering our next strategic growth. We have been successful in the last 20 years, to provide thought leadership in terms of life skills, SCL, to the education space itself. We have developed our expertise to work with children from adversity. We have a very robust, mature facilitation approach that we can train others on. And we have partnerships at scale. So our ambition for the next 5 years is much larger. In the next slide. And what we're looking to do is, if I have to fundamentally solve the problem for the 130 million children in India, is can I reimagine the purpose of education? Because today I know there is a 97% enrollment into school systems, especially public schools in India. So we're setting ourselves an ambitious goal. Can education systems move away from traditional notions of success, from just measuring academic outcomes, from just looking at numeracy literacy outcomes, to also integrate life skills, social emotional learning, also called 21st century skills, as part of school preparation, as part of understanding whether we have really prepared children for the future they're entering and not preparing them for the past. To do that, we will continue to run the innovation labs. These are our proof of concepts. We'll continue to work with the state partnerships. We're hoping to go from 5 to at least 8 to 10 state partnerships in the next 5 years. But we're also now looking at much more ecosystem influence. How do we work with central governments? How do we work with other nonprofits? How do we work with bilateral agencies? How do we work with media? And how can we bring together the entire ecosystem? Because our ability to reimagine education requires a mindset shift in all of us. It can't be achieved just by training some teachers or introducing the happiness curriculum. Every one of us must ask the question, what will prepare children for the future and what will help them thrive? And when I can create that mindset shift, that is when there is a real likelihood that education will become more relevant to the challenges that young people are facing today. So this is where we are, and we would love your support. We're looking at advocacy, we're looking at policy change, we're looking at, of course, we have a budget of about 100 crores for the next 5 years. So we're looking for the support that we need to make this happen. So thank you so much. And yeah, like Kamala, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Sucheta, for that engaging presentation. Our third speaker for the grandstand is Dr. Akhil Shahani, Managing Director of the Shahani Group. He will talk about skilling students for employability using multi-pronged scientific approaches. Dr. Shahani, over to you, please.
Thanks, Isha. And I'm so glad that I'm following up with Sucheta, because she's actually set a great framework about the need to actually create employable graduates and what it really takes to get kids to be employable. Now, so we actually, my doctorate thesis is in the area of student employability and what it takes to make a kid employable in the white collar world. Because I think we all know is that when you look at 21st century skills or where the future work, a lot of the major job growth is going to happen in the services industry. There's going to be a lot more demand for white collar workers, and unfortunately, manufacturing is going to remain stagnant. Forget about agriculture. So now the issue that we face is that for the vast majority, and as Sucheta said, is that 90% of the kids who tend to be into informal employment, the blue collar workers, the gray collar workers. And we actually have come up with a model that is enabled to create a classic underprivileged, non-speaking English kid into a white collar worker to help them to jump into a good quality company with a white collar work in a short period of time, using a combination of data analytics and behavioral science. Next slide, please. Let me give an example of Divya. So Divya is a classic example. She lives with a mother, single mother in a Bombay slum. She works as a seamstress, but she wants to get a job in a bank or a white collar office. Now, the thing is that because she doesn't speak English, because frankly, her school education and undergrad education has not been very good, she doesn't have the communication skills, she doesn't have the personality, she doesn't have what is called the finesse or the attitude or the employability aspect that makes a white collar recruiter want to hire her. So she will be limited to, let's say, a classic informal job. She would be, let's say, one of the waitresses you see in restaurants. She would be someone who is serving you coffee in Starbucks. She may be, let's say, one of the delivery people that you see in gig workers. But she will never be able to jump to corporate white collar work and will never be able to move the needle on her family, because she will always be, without any intervention, she'll always be in that underprivileged area of actually not being able to scale up her family based on income. So next, please. So Divya discovers Sage Foundation Job Skills Training Program. She joined our program. Within 45 days, we're able to assess her employability traits. We train her in English communication. She is taught by industry managers. She has hardcore soft skills training for her job. She has got mock interview sessions with industry recruiters. She is counseled regularly to make sure that she sticks on to the program and she doesn't drop out because of various issues. And it is all driven by a smartphone app through a combination of online education and a bit of offline experiential learning, right? Next slide, please. And finally, Divya is placed in a job in her dreams in a multinational bank. Next slide, please. All right, so over the past couple of years, of course, we're much younger than some of the previous organizations, but we have trained thousands of kids like Divya to get high-paying white-collar jobs. We have actually made them to take a kid within 45 days. They come from, more often than not, an underprivileged background. They're the first kid in their family to actually get educated even up to, let's say, college level. But the thing is that they don't speak English. They don't have the wherewithal or the skill set to get a job in the white collar world. We have got thousands of these kids within 45 days to be trained in English, got the employability skills, and to get jobs in the BFSI sector, the banking, financial insurance sector. What is amazing is that most of these kids on an average get a monthly salary of 25,000 rupees. Some of them have gone up to 4 lakh rupees a year, which gives them a huge jump in their family income, which they probably would not have got with a classic vocational course where they learn how to be plumbers, carpenters, or gig workers. So we found that there's actually a hardcore behavioral science data analytics model that allows us to get these kids into the white collar world in a very structured approach. Next, please. How do we do that? Next, please. All right. So there's a classic Peter. Go back. Yeah, there you go. So there's a classic Peter Drucker phrase that says, "What can be measured will be managed." Now, I'm always a big believer in an impact measurement, using numbers, using data to ensure that you're able to deliver the right outcomes, and you can measure the impact so you can keep on constantly growing. And we are very, very geeky. My undergraduate is in education, is in engineering, my MBA, and of course, my doctorate. So what we started off by saying is that when you want to make someone employable, you need to measure what employability is. So what we have done through a proprietary framework, we are able to take entry-level jobs offered by multinational banks, by top Indian banks, by financial services companies, others, and map them according to the framework of hard skills and soft skills. And we're able to use this mapping in terms of numbers. So for example, we can map problem-solving skills around the range of 0 to 10, team working from 0 to 10, computer skills from 0 to 10. Each of these is measured, and we come up with sort of a map of what the job entails to actually get this kid employable to join that job. Next, please. All right, so basically what we do, we understand what the kid's capability is, we understand what the job requires, and through a data-driven platform, you are able to give the kid what the gap it is between what they are and what they need to be. And we keep on training them through behavioral science, and too much time to explain what that is. But the idea is that we actually make sure that they get the job which they're mapped to. Next, please. This will actually show you, these are actually live screens from our mobile apps that show, like, for example, on the right screen, you see the skill gap between what the job requires and what the kid has. And we are able to develop the kid through data analytics and behavioral science to make sure that they get the right job. On the left-hand side, you see measures of their professionalism, proactiveness, critical thinking, so on and so forth. Next, please. All right, so based on our impact, we've got a 94% placement rate on an average. Kids within 45 days of English training and industry training that we offer, they get jobs at around 25,000 rupees salary on an average, a 90% plus rate and 94% placement rate of kids who are passed, and they've got jobs in these sort of things. Imagine a classic kid from a Bombay slum area has got jobs in this place. Next. Okay, and these are, of course, some great success stories, like Edwin has actually got a job in the UK. He's playing football. There's Taskeen, who actually was going to lose a house because of she couldn't pay rent, but she got a job in Kota, so on and so forth. Great, some fantastic success stories we'd love to talk about. Next. And of course, we got recognition. Clinton Global Initiative has awarded us. We've got Jamal Bajaj. Next, please. Media coverage, of course, they've actually appreciated our model. Next, please. Okay, now the ask. Basically, we are looking to train and place around 1 million underprivileged students in India by 2025. We are looking for partners who will either be helping us scale into other parts of India in terms of, let's say, local NGOs. We are looking, of course, for grant funding as well to help us scale up the Bombay-based model into other areas. And of course, we're looking at maybe other innovation partners who actually could help us with refining our data measures. In fact, we're looking for strong support in implementing IRIS Plus standards or IMP standards into our program, because we are very geeky, data-driven people who look at an outcome. Last slide, please. If you want to know more, please feel free to email me. I'd be happy to discuss with you guys more and look for some sort of future partnerships. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shahani. That was a very informative presentation. Our next speaker is Isha Hussain, project lead at Synergos. Isha will be speaking about using daycare models to prevent drowning deaths of children in Bangladesh. Isha, over to you, please.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Isha from Bangladesh, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to listen to all of you, such inspirational work. I imagine that, like me, when you think of the reason for your work, you might think of a particular child you know or have met, and the hope you hold for that child's future, that he or she may thrive and succeed in life. In my work, I have learned that for that to happen, children need nurturing care, a set of supports that include health, nutrition, security, and above all, responsive caregiving. While it may appear that child drowning prevention is more of a health issue, today I will tell you the important connections it has with education and how this collaboration between sectors is paving the way for scale and sustainability of community-based early childhood care and development in Bangladesh. Change the slide, please. Here you can see the government data, which shows that drowning is the leading cause of death of children under 5 in Bangladesh. It has been proven by Johns Hopkins implementation research for some years now that improved supervision in community daycares, especially during hours of highest risk, is an effective solution for preventing child drowning. The research also shows it comes with wider benefits, including cognitive development. Next slide, please. But despite the proof of concept in saving lives, the connections were not being widely recognized outside the limited research community. And therefore, government intentions for scaling community daycares were unlikely. There was no public demand either due to low awareness about prevention. Next slide. Synergos began work on this issue in Bangladesh in 2018 towards national scale and sustainability of daycare centers. We started by widening the frame to fit the neglected issue of child drowning prevention under ECCD, and in a very short time, we're able to draw support from leading ECD NGOs and government actors. And today I'm happy to share that a proposal for government to scale integrated childcare centers is currently being reviewed by government and has passed some critical stages in the approval cycle. And how did it happen so quickly? I must say that it was possible through a collaboration of partners that Synergos brought together from across the injury prevention and ECCD fields, breaking them out of their technical silos and unifying them through this shared goal for the care, development, and safety of children. Here you can see some logos of agencies. Apart from government agencies such as Ministry of Women and Children Affairs, we have Bangladesh ECD Network, BRAC, a public health research agency, Bloomberg Philanthropists, among others, who worked alongside us in collective design and advocacy. Next slide, please. This is a graphic of the low-cost model for integrated ECCD. For this, obviously, we drew inspiration from the Indian Anganwadi model. The strength of this model is the recognition that scale and sustainability is made possible by grounding childcare centers in communities and coordinating cross-sector services for children and families. When implemented, it will serve 200,000 disadvantaged children in 16 priority districts across Bangladesh in its first phase. The project is also expected to expand to all of the country's 64 districts in multiple phases. Next slide, please. I humbly say that Synergos led this initiative, but none of this could have been possible without the energy and experience from so many partners who have worked alongside us. As a Bangladeshi development professional, I can reflect that the potentials of collective action, inclusive partnerships, and bridging gaps between competing sectors is so powerful and yet have not been tapped enough. In this initiative, we've been able to push the squeaky wheel of drowning prevention through Synergos' bridging leadership approach. It establishes trust for meaningful connections. With this approach, we were able to analyze issues with a systems perspective and focus on the larger goal we have. In this case, the bright future of that child who inspires us. We started to see that we all have a part in helping the child reach his or her greatest potential. Synergos is a global nonprofit and has experience of applying bridging leadership approach to address many issues of poverty and inequity around the world, even in India, launching the Tri-Sectoral Alliance for Child Nutrition. Next slide, please. Well, we are all here today because we are committed to realizing a better future for our children and communities. We know it is possible. I'm here to learn from your experiences that sound very rich. What are the issues you're working on that would benefit from collaborative action? What are your stories on effective partnership with the government? How to mobilize regional or global voice for increased investment on holistic childcare services? How can the private sector partner with the government on this? If you're already working this way, how might we work together? In any of these cases, let's talk and build bridges to improve lives. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Isha, for that session. For a final grandstand of the South Asia Impact Capital Festival, I'm pleased to call upon Sanya Sagar, Senior Manager, Design and Program Readiness from STIR Edu. Sanya will talk about co-creating with the government to build sustainable education programs. Sanya, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Isha. Hi, everyone. So I'm not going to be talking so much about our work at STIR. Rather, I'll be speaking to you about one integral part of our model in each of our geographies, which is how do we work with governments as co-creators instead of mere partners on a contract. But before I talk to you about why we're doing that and how we're trying to do it, I'll give you a quick overview of what we do. Isha, next slide. So, our mission is to support education systems to reignite intrinsic motivation in every teacher and official so that they may role model the foundations of lifelong learning for every child. Why are we doing this? Similar to what Sucheta had said, we believe that education systems must prepare every child to thrive in a world of unknown unknowns. And we also believe that one of the best ways to do this is by working and building the foundations of lifelong learning in every classroom. These foundations being engagement, safety, self-esteem, critical thinking, and curiosity, and intentional practice. However, instead of relying on theoretical trainings that we give to teachers, what we do is we work with every level of the system so that each level role models these foundations for the next, all the while creating an environment for their peers and colleagues that gives them a sense of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, thus increasing their intrinsic motivation. We also work directly with governments. We work directly with governments because one of our key learnings has been that for any program to succeed, government engagement is key. We don't want to build parallel systems that are run by us. Instead, we want to embed these practices and processes within the system so that they may be sustained for a long period of time. Next slide, please. So our co-creation process, actually, that's why it begins at the design process. when we have to decide what our theoretical focus, our thematic focus for the upcoming cycle will be, we run needs analysis surveys at the district and school level to find out what teachers and officials really want to focus on at that time. This data is then shared with state and district level officials who analyze it and take a decision on what thematic area to focus on. Once that's done, we bring teachers and officials together who help us create the material that's then distributed through the program. When it's time for implementation, our institutes, which are our capacity building sessions, are actually almost entirely run by the officials, who then support teacher network meetings in which teachers come together, discuss pedagogical ideas, contextualize them to their needs, and then observe each other in classrooms, give each other developmental feedback, and are coached and supported by school leaders. They then adapt their practice based on the feedback that they receive. So we were in the middle of all of these processes last year when COVID suddenly hit. All our material was ready to go, but we didn't even know if that would be suitable any longer. But more importantly, none of our programs in any of our geographies had a technological component. And so very quickly, we needed to figure out how we were going to adapt to this situation. The only thing we knew for sure was that this wouldn't be a decision taken at the central level, because each geography was grappling with COVID in such different ways. A standardized COVID response really didn't make sense. So instead, we went to the governments. We asked them to co-create the COVID response strategy with us. We asked them, what do you want to prioritize in the content? How much time do you think people can actually give to this right now? What role do you see the program playing at a time like this? Next slide, please. These consultations then led us down two paths. In Karnataka and Delhi, we continued the program as is, but shifted all of the activities online. In Tamil Nadu and Uganda, we had to make some adaptations to the delivery of the content. So in Tamil Nadu, teachers were now engaging through interactive videos that were shared with them through their cell phones, whereas in Uganda, teachers were engaging with the content through radio programs. What was common, though, was a focus on social emotional well-being that each system wanted, along with ways to capacitate the system to engage each other online. Next slide, please. These are a few snippets from our programs happening online. This is Tamil Nadu. Next. This is a meeting in Delhi. Next. And this is Karnataka, which was a consultation meeting with the government. Next slide, please. So why is co-creation important? Because we went to the government as a first step, they realized that we truly cared about aligning with them in ways that were useful to them. And so at a time when so many programs were either shutting down or coming to a standstill, we were actually asked to expand to even more districts in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Because we went to the system to ask them, what is it that you really want to focus on? What's going to be helpful to you at this time? We saw an increase in ownership across stakeholders and across geographies, where officials and school leaders were leading brainstorms, leading sessions, and supporting each other. And this led to a strengthened sense of partnership between us and the government. If we had seen the government as just a partner who needed to be updated on our next steps, we probably would have missed out on this opportunity to support the systems. Because we saw them as co-creators, our interventions actually ended up becoming important forums that allowed teachers to remain connected and motivated with each other through a very difficult period of time. Next, please. So what's next? We want to explore a blended delivery model that takes into account all the learnings that we have got from this time during COVID, implementing the program online. This will also be done through consultations with the government so that we know what it is they value and what they want to continue. We want to keep driving the ownership of systems in all of our geographies. For example, recently we renewed our MOU with the Delhi government and will be setting up our first ever lifelong learning unit, which will be run entirely by the system. Lastly, we want to take our learnings to new geographies. We are already setting up in Indonesia and also want to potentially look at other states in India. And we invite all other organizations who are interested in coming along this journey with us to reach out for collaboration. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sanya. We have now come to the end of the grandstand. This session has been made possible with the kind support of our festival partners, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Sesame Workshop India, the Rockefeller Foundation, COVID Action Collab, BNV Advisory Services LLP, the British Asian Trust, WPP India CSR Foundation, Catalyst Management Services Private Limited, UNDP, and Satwa. To continue chatting with your speakers and fellow delegates in this session, please make full use of the messaging and meeting function of our festival platform. Do share your highlights of this session on social media and remember to tag us using the hashtag at the hashtag AVPN South Asia 2021 and hashtag social impact. Up next, the session on investing in girls' education, a key to sustainable development, will be starting at 5:10 p.m. Thank you, and please enjoy the rest of the festival.
Asia is a dynamic and diverse region with a deep history, rich culture, and beautiful landscape. In the past decade, the region has exploded with growth and prosperity. But with that progress comes a growing disparity between the rich and the poor. Population growth, lack of proper education and stable livelihoods, growing health concerns, and environmental challenges are serious issues in Asia, providing sharp contrast to the economic progress. To tackle these complex challenges, we need collaborative solutions that cross sectors and borders, inspire innovative ideas, and combine resources to create lasting impact. At AVPN, we are building a vibrant and high-impact philanthropy and social investment community that brings together a diverse group of funders and resource providers addressing these many social challenges across Asia. We are a platform, advocate, and capacity builder, enabling collaboration and knowledge sharing. Our wide-reaching membership includes foundations, impact funds, corporations, universities, and governments that are investing money, people, and knowledge into the social sector. AVPN members work throughout the entire Asia-Pacific region, funding projects that range from education, health, livelihoods, and the environment. They support women and children, people in poverty, the elderly, and the disabled. AVPN's convening platform is unique because it breaks down silos to empower all stakeholders. We create connections and identify synergies across sectors and borders to maximize the impact of our members. Our Knowledge Center provides frameworks and highlights best practice, from due diligence and capacity building to impact assessment. We inspire social investors to go beyond simply writing a check, to become more strategic, collaborative, and outcome-focused, ultimately improving the lives of millions across the region. AVPN is accelerating the growth of the philanthropy and social investment ecosystem in Asia. Join us and become part of this movement.